Hi, I'm Renee, and I'm here with CEO of Platinum Edge and author of Scrum For Dummies, Mark Layton. Hi, we're happy to have you here.
Oh, thanks so much. I appreciate the opportunity.
After the success of Agile project management for dummies, what made you want to write Scrum For Dummies?
Well, I really wanted to show people tangibly how they could use Scrum outside of the IT space. I mean, so much has been written about Scrum within the IT space that people have sort of come to acknowledge we know it works there. But actually, it isn't that it works in the IT space. It works in every part of your life. Any part of your life where you want early empirical evidence of performance and quality, it's applicable to. And so I wanted to show people how we're using it in every industry that is out there. Subway systems, rock amplifiers, micro-miniature medical devices, physical construction. Any part where I can encapsulate the work and prioritize it against other work, it is absolutely applicable for. And I wanted to show people tangibly how that was the case. Not only theoretically talking about using it in these industries, but giving people an explicit model that they could refer back to and execute against.
So it sounds like you wanted to educate people that Scrum can be applied anywhere outside of the IT industry, but why do you think that Scrum has such a reputation for being only for the IT industry?
I think it's because our origins is in IT, and there's a reason that our origins are from IT. I mean, if you look at traditional waterfall success rates, they're absolutely dismal, 32%. And when you talk about an industry like application development, we're spending $500 billion a year just in application development. And so a 32% success rate in those types of investments is utterly unacceptable. And so it's really the egregiousness of the IT industry that I think shows its origin coming from the IT space. Having proven, though, that it can work in the IT space, it's absolutely applicable in every other part of life.
So once people accept that Scrum is adaptable outside of IT, what do you think is the biggest hurdle toward getting it integrated in other industries?
Well, I think that the problem is that because there's been so much writing about Scrum in the IT space that people associate its application outside of the IT space as an exception. And they apply that exception within the Scrum framework itself. And so they say, okay, well, Scrum is great for IT, but we're not doing IT, we're doing bio, research, and development. So we're now going to tweak Scrum to sort of align with what we're used to doing historically. And that's completely the wrong thing to do. And so, Scrum can be applied in its purest form, no matter what your endeavor that you're trying to do is. And so the biggest challenge that we find is people who believe that they're an exception. That means that they can modify Scrum, and then they start producing something that is not Scrum in any way, shape, or form, and many times is not even Agile. And so the biggest challenge that we run into is helping people sort of understand Scrum as it is applicable to what you're trying to do.
What could someone who isn't from IT or isn't even from an Agile background take away from Scrum for Dummies?
They're going to be able to take away a tangible model in how to apply Scrum within whatever industry they're in, whichever goal they are trying to obtain. So the whole purpose of the Scrum for Dummies book isn't just to talk theoretically about how Scrum can be used in other industries. It's to provide explicit examples of how it's being used in those other industries, a model that you can take and run with.
What was your experience writing the book?
Well, I wrote the book, using a Scrum approach, and actually, to be honest with you, it's the only reason that I have any books that are out on the marketplace itself. If you go back to our first book, Agile Project Management for Dummies, that was done explicitly using a Scrum model. Now, I should tell you, before I wrote any of these books, I did research on how is it that Wiley requires authors to do For Dummies book, and we wrote our book according to those standards. But I needed to sync up with my individual editor, and so when you talk about publishing, in an Agile approach, we have a concept which is called a vision, the end state. Well, in publishing, that's called a premise. So what is the premise of the book? And the premise that I had for Agile Project Management is I wanted a field guide that people who were really doing it could refer back to in situationally appropriate ways so that they could get the answers that they needed. That was my premise. You then have a concept called a product roadmap. Well, in publishing, that's called an outline. I put together my premise, I put together an outline that sort of operationalized my premise, I submitted it to Wiley. They said it looks good, we're willing to fund it. Great, we move forward with the book. Well, the first thing that we need is we need a release, and in publishing that's called a section. We identified a section, we then started running sprints, which in publishing is called a chapter. We wrote our very first chapter, in this case it was chapter 7. Now, I should tell you, we wrote Chapter 7 exactly the way that Wiley requires For Dummies books to be written. We submitted it to our editor. And you want to know what she said? I hate it. And this is why. Boom, 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 boom. We took her feedback. We used it to improve Chapter 7. We used it to inform us for the next chapter that we wrote. In this case, it happened to be Chapter 9. We submitted it to our editor. And she said, I don't like it. And this is why. Boom, 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 boom. She didn't hate it anymore, but she didn't like it. We took her feedback. We used it to improve Chapter 9. We then used it to write our next chapter, which coincidentally happened to be Chapter 10. We submitted it to our editor, and she said, it's okay, but it'd be better if you boom, 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 boom. The only reason that I have a book on the marketplace is because of this inspect and adapt model. By our 5th chapter, we had synced up with our editor. And from that point, we would submit a chapter, a little bit of feedback here, a little bit of feedback there. But had I written 20 plus chapters, submitted it to my editor, and had her say, I hate it, and this is why, I assure you there would be no books on the marketplace today.
What do you think the biggest surprise in Scrum for Dummies is?
I think it's universality. I think that a lot of people understand that Scrum can be used in other professional settings. And so as we're talking about using it in finance, we're talking about using it in customer service, we're using it in HR. I think that that's a natural sort of connection for people. They sort of get that. When we start talking about how do you Scrum to plan the perfect family vacation? How do you Scrum to find love? Now I think people start looking at that and sort of saying, wow, I can use this in any part of my life. I want to start a fitness program. Scrum can help you get there. That's, I think, is going to be the biggest surprise for people.
So where are some real-world examples of Scrum being applied outside of IT that you're seeing?
We're seeing it be applied in every industry that is out there. So, as I said before, we're seeing it being applied in transportation, military operations, physical construction, biotech research and development. In fact, biotech research and development is sort of a natural affiliation with what we're talking about under this experimentation model of inspect and adapt. In biotech, we have what's called a hypothesis. And a hypothesis is basically just going to be a release under an Agile model. Well, if that hypothesis is going to be true or false, there are a series of premises that need to be true or false. Those premises are basically just our sprints. We'll run a sprint. At the end of that sprint, we'll go into a sprint review meeting where we'll go before a PhD board and we'll say, we know that this premise is either true or false, and this is why. That PhD board will then say, okay, we accept that that premise is either true or false. We think that the experimentation that you did is valid, or you failed to look at this, you failed to look at that, what about this, so on and so forth. Based on the feedback from that PhD board, we'll decide, do we either want to iterate that particular premise, or do we want to increment down to the next premise? We'll move through the premises. At the end of that release, we'll say, we know this hypothesis is either true or false, and here empirically is how we know that it's either true or false. We'll then either write a white paper that is based on that hypothesis, or we'll use it for the research and development that we're doing, or so on and so forth. And so there are examples out there. Anytime that you want to be using an experimentation, inspect and adapt model, it will naturally lend itself to a Scrum model.
What about who could benefit from reading Scrum for Dummies?
Well, IT team members can benefit from reading it. Executives could benefit from it. People who are doing finance could benefit. People who are trying to do some sort of research, they could benefit from it. Mothers could benefit from it. Salespeople could benefit from it. Everybody could benefit from it. That's the whole purpose of the book, right? How to use Scrum in every part of your life, whatever that part of your life happens to be.
Well, I think that's a pretty good note to close on. So thank you so much for talking to us, and we definitely look forward to reading it soon.
Excellent. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, everybody.